Now, welcome back. Now, the loss of a pregnancy or an infant is devastating. In fact, it's termed as one of the loneliest forms of grief, as many women and couples are unable to talk about it. Worse still is having to navigate life and work. Now, only recently have some countries embraced giving paid leave to couples who have encountered the loss of a pregnancy. EABL became the first company in Kenya to offer the reprieve to staff. Now, what does this mean for the labor market, and will other companies follow suit? And will such a move see more couples become more open about their struggles with pregnancy loss? Well, to help unpack all of this is Wanjiru Kihusa, a Still a Mom platform founder, joining in from Dubai, and Dr. Patricia Murugami, a Breakthrough Leadership Transformation founder and CEO. Thank you both for joining me. It was really interesting to come across the article in the dailies. This was earlier this week, where they talked about EABL giving their staff up to 6.5 months leave if they encounter a pregnancy loss. And what's also very interesting is they extend that to male employees whose partners have also gone through that. Wanjiru, let me begin with you. Because this is a journey you have been on for years in terms of advocacy. Do you count this a win for your work?
Absolutely. It is such an exciting time, to be honest. It's a little bit long overdue, but it is such a big win given all the work that we've been doing for the last 8-9 years. Not just opening up the conversations around miscarriages, stillbirth, infant death, and moving this topic from something that used to be taboo to something that people talk about with, well, not as much ease, but at least much more ease than it used to be. And to see companies embrace this and as a way of, supporting their workforce is a huge, huge win in my book.
Right. And you are one of those brave souls who decided to share their story about pregnancy loss early on, when very few people actually wanted to. It was still a taboo topic. Why did you feel the need to do it then? Because we're really seeing more and more people sharing about their pregnancy loss struggles as a result.
I would say, to be honest, is I had a very amazing support system. And at the same time, there were all these women who were sharing with me personally their Me Too stories, and not just women either. It was their partners, their boyfriends, their husbands, and even the siblings, the sisters, the parents. And so because of all those women whose situation they at the time would not allow for them to share their stories. And even many times who would say, could you just not share my name, And so I felt the obligation to speak up on my behalf, but also on their behalf. And yeah, there was always this feedback that that's a really personal story to share out there, to take out in the media. It didn't always come off as creating awareness. In some cases, it came off sort of like seeking attention for this, for sympathy or for pity. But at the end of the day, it's all these other voices who had similar stories were able to be given energy and strength. And for that, I'm really grateful.
Right. And a bit later on, we'll talk about how we can further normalize conversations around pregnancy loss. But let me come to you, Dr. Patricia, because, the reason why EABL is doing all of this, their parent company, Diageo, had actually implemented a similar policy back in September in their UK and Ireland markets. What do you make of this HR policy? What does it mean for the labor market at a time like this?
First and foremost, congratulations to the Diageo family. And because of the muscle that a big corporate has, it means it's taking a real step towards making culture more human and humane. So that's the first thing. Yeah. The second thing is that they're recognizing that life begins at conception. And I just want to honor Wanjiru and Still a Mom, the foundation and the platform you've had, because for a lot of women, me included, when you lose a child, you actually are struggling to figure out what am I even, from an identity perspective. And I remember one of the pieces of advice that someone gave us was that child from conception first is a child. And I think that the fact that a corporate is beginning to see that is wonderful. And then the third point is that culture, we at Breakthrough actually say that culture is what you tolerate, what you celebrate, what you penalize, and what you nurture.
Interesting.
Now, this part has to do with celebrating and nurturing. And usually what happens is that the levels of engagement drop dramatically for a woman or for her spouse after the loss of a child because they are grieving, and then the grieving is tabooish. On top of that, there's also a shadow of shame that comes with it around, did I do something wrong to cause this to happen? And the further along you are, the more questions come your way, such that you go back to work having had a pregnancy of 24 weeks, 30 weeks, and then when you go back to work after a couple of weeks, everyone is congratulating you because they don't know that you actually left the hospital without a child. So that causes the trauma. So I know a number of women who were not able to try to have children again and actually got into very deep depression that they've taken years to get out of, including the risk that marriages actually fall apart because the taboo and the stress is so high. So if you look at it from a culture perspective, cultures of organizations are now moving towards meaning, human and humane. So well done to Diageo. And I think a lot of corporates ought to really take this position.
You know, what does it mean for employees themselves? Because generally you'll find they shy away from even sharing that they're pregnant because, oh, will this impact my progression in my career? You know, and oftentimes the stigma that you're talking about, the shame attached to it. Will we see more people be open about their journeys with pregnancy loss as a result?
Absolutely. First, there's the piece around people who have gone through it and never got healing, turning their wounds into wisdom. Because not only is this policy around giving you leave, it's also to give you the tools, whether it's therapy, whether it's whatever it is that you need. So we are seeing a lot of woundedness will start to reduce at the workplace. But secondly, we are also seeing a very extreme piece of data where when young women of childbearing age are hired in some organizations, I remember hearing of a lady manager actually saying, you 10 ladies, we have to organize when you're getting pregnant. And I was like, how dare you even think like that when life is a gift? So we're going to start to see the idea of women actually coming into the workplace, families where it's a husband and wife coming to the workplace and actually saying, I'm bringing my whole self to the workplace. And innovation will grow when you actually begin to embrace the fact that this person is of childbearing age. And in the event that that child is lost, they should be accorded the dignity of a human person.
Yeah. It's interesting what you mentioned. On the flip side of that pregnancy loss is also the motherhood penalty, just what you were talking about, trying to organize the pregnancies of employees. But, you know, I'll come back to you, Dr. Patricia. Let me come to you, Wanjiru, because how do you equip couples, women who've gone through pregnancy loss, with the necessary tools to deal with that shame, to deal with that stigma, as they're trying to reintegrate back into some normalcy in their lives?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I'm excited that this Diageo new policy is also for dads. Like, that's really important because it's the same way maternity leave makes no sense if there's absolutely no one helping you back home. And at the same time, what it does for the diversity, equity, and inclusion policies when we also have dads having, you know, time to be with their families. And so to come to your question regarding equipping couples, one of the first things we do is to get these parents to really accept what has happened to them. And so we encourage, whether it be through support groups or one-on-one counseling, is just to come from this place where the grief is extremely raw to getting to a point of healing and then going back to whatever that life you used to have is. For some, it could be they were in school, they were running businesses, or in this case, they were working in a company. And so for some, it requires, you know, a longer term, probably 6 months in terms of, you know, just coping with the grief and getting to a place where they feel, okay, I can do life again. And because grief is so unique and complex, different people are different and respond different. And during the few times when I've had even HRs from different companies reach out to me and say, hey, could you do a letter for this lady? We would like her, we know she's going through like support groups or she's going through some form of therapy, and we'd like to anchor that somewhere internally and say, this is where we're giving her some time off. And parents will come and ask for different kinds of support. There will be that person who wants to come back to work a little earlier because staying home is a nightmare. You know, there's absolutely nothing she's doing home. She has no baby, but then she's now not at work. So they feel like if they come back and plug into the workforce, hopefully in a healthy way, not to escape the grief, then that's also a solution. But for others, they want to take their entire maternity leave. For example, if it was a stillbirth, they want to take their entire leave and rest and heal. And I'd like just to mention here that while many companies would not probably acknowledge like a miscarriage, you know, they'd assume, you know, the pregnancy was not far along, so it probably was just a hospital visit. The truth of the matter is that as even early miscarriages require a DNC procedure, like going to the hospital, and there was an actual procedure that is done for the woman, and they do need actually to recuperate. But generally, this is the kind of things we walk through until we feel that someone is ready to go back to what this new normal is.
I want to go back to something you said about how important it is to recognize the help that men need, because I believe a conversation we had earlier about this is men tend to feel the grief later. So for women, it would kind of hit almost immediately, but for the man in the relationship, by the time it hits him, what's going on, it's further along. So how do you offer support in that kind of scenario?
So to be honest, what happens is there's actually been a study that was conducted in a non-profit organization, kind of like what Still a Mom does, but in Italy, and they studied dads. And what the study showed was that immediately after the loss, the woman's grief is at its peak, you know, and then from that point on, it reduces over time. However, for the men, the grief just immediately after the loss is not as high yet. And this was what the explanation given here was probably because of men at that point are making sure that the woman is in hospital, getting her a room, paying the hospital bill, discharging her. They are doing all of these things. If the baby was far along, there may be a barrier, and that's what they're figuring out. And so at that point, they've not quite settled the grief. And then what usually has happened is it was seen that when they go home, and around from even the fifth month onward, it's sort of like their grief begins to peak. And at some point, they sort of like cross over, so that the woman's grief is reducing while the man's grief is increasing. And so these nuances that show us the differences in how people grieve, beginning first of all even with gender, is a great point of understanding when we offer support. I have noticed that, for example, men do not come for support groups. They do not want to sit in a circle and share their feelings in the presence of other people. However, they will instead come with their spouses for one-on-one therapy. So those are certainly unique things that you see, and that's how we choose to respond to supporting the dads.
Fantastic. Dr. Patricia, let me finish with you just in terms of big picture and how, other companies can start thinking about how else can we be more gender inclusive, just in the way we structure the workplace and the culture as well.
And I love the fact that you've asked me about big picture, because the whole idea behind having humane and human culture is about people. And a lot of companies are actually saying people are their most important asset. Let's take a step back and think about the population conversation that Africa has been told that we're overpopulated. First, that is false. Secondly, I have seen from the research that we are seeing that fertility rates have actually been dropping. If you look at the 5-child, in 1950 to the 2.1 child per woman in 2021. So we're going to continue seeing a drop in fertility rates. If we can think as organizations that the license to operate has everything to do with ensuring that the spaces where we are operating in as businesses are actually supposed to engender and ensure that the continuity of life increases as opposed to diminishing. So this idea of a contraceptive mentality, the idea that we should be having fewer children, is actually a political agenda. And if we look at some of the countries are wintering populations. So what are they doing? They're introducing people actually relocating so that the manpower can grow. But it's that African companies and multinationals who are operating in Africa can first and foremost recognize that they have a real dire sustainability responsibility and a leadership responsibility. Then we will see an increase of this kind of thinking. Secondly, let's think about life beyond now the loss. They're finding that children from families where there's been a loss are also going through therapy. So I've seen some cutting-edge Fortune 500 companies actually introducing art therapy for the children, family therapy for the entire family. And so the healing process doesn't take as long as it would have done in the past. And then there's a new addition of adoption leave.
Okay.
That in the event that you really can't have children, or you choose to have children through adoption or fostering, they're actually getting the same kind of leave as maternity leave. So we're beginning to see a real shift towards spaces becoming more human, more humane, and recognizing that there's no point of producing such amazing products and there are no people to consume it, beginning with the people who work for that organization.
Interesting. So seeing that shift more to family-oriented kind of policies in the workspace, definitely something that we'll be watching and observing as we go along. Thank you so much, Dr. Patricia and Wanjiru, for your time. Hopefully this is a conversation that we continue and a policy that we see replicated across the corporate sector here in Kenya and the region. Let's take a short break here on Citizen Weekend. Here's what's coming up on sports.
Thank you.
Kenya Police FC